Welcome back to Sons of the Shoe. We talked a lot about the quarterback position and how that room looks to be sort of falling into or rounding into shape already this spring. I would be remiss, though, if I didn't talk about the defense and just how incredible this group is. Because, like, this is the group. I don't want to say, when I say much like last year, I don't want it to be a knock on this team as a whole and the offense as a whole. Because I do think just with the changes, Kyle McCord out, Will Howard in, some of the new talents that have come in, Jeremiah Smith most notably. We'll get to him in the final segment. I don't want to make it sound like, okay, the defense is going to carry them like they did last year, where it was just the defense and basically Marvin Harrison Jr., were the two things you could count on every single game. And but this defense is the reason why they are going to have a chance to win any game that they're in. I mean, much like how Michigan's defense this past year, I know we don't like to use them as an example, but Michigan's defense this past year was phenomenal, kept them in a lot of games that were tight and made plays that kind of got the ball back to their offense, and their offense in some of those bigger matchups wasn't able to pull away, like Penn State, like Ohio State, like Alabama. And I think that's going to be very similar for Ohio State next year. Like this unit, I said the secondary, which was from what I could, again, I mentioned in the first segment, but the secondary for Ohio State, which features Denzel Burke coming back, Davison Igbinosun, who was fantastic, Caleb Downs, Lathan Ransom, who was actually out the other day. Like this group has a chance to be that group alone. They say the term BIA, like I said, best in America. I don't see why that's not the case. That group is super talented. It was hard for guys to get open, even with the first team offense. It's why, like I mentioned, Will Howard at times seemed a little hesitant to throw the football because he knew those windows were tight. And he knew if it wasn't a window that was open, it was going to close really, really quickly because these guys are so damn good. That's going to, I mean, but them and up front as well, where you have a number of guys returning up front as to go along with the secondary, Jack Sawyer, Ty Hamilton, Tyleek Williams, JT Tuimoloau. Like that whole group is stellar. They're going to have all these last couple of years. We found ourselves, at least I did, kind of sitting there asking, okay, where's the pass rush? Where's the pass rush? Where's the pass rush? Why can't they get to the passer? And by design, when you can get to the passer, that sometimes helps your secondary. And I thought the last couple of years, Ohio State's secondary wasn't as dominant as we're used to, right? Like when we're talking about DBU. But this year, I think the secondary could probably handle a lot on their own anyway. But I think it's going to be the perfect pairing of having an elite level pass rush of guys that are veterans, that have been there, that are a guy like Jack Sawyer, who really, I think, found his stride in the Peach Bowl. And then on the back end, you have just this lockdown group. That unit looked fantastic on Saturday as advertised. And it is one of those things where you probably expect the defense to be ahead of the offense, probably at this phase of the offseason anyway, because you know, the offense is installing things, and there's a new quarterback and all these different factors. The defense, it's a lot of returners, and it's a lot of like, all right, you know what you're doing, just go execute. So I was blown away by that group, the secondary most notably, but just the entire defense. And like I mentioned, again, not trying to make it a slight from last year to this year and saying that they're going to carry the team, but they're going to be the reason why they can win any game, because they will keep games tight. They will keep games close. They are going to be an absolute force for opponents to try to move the football up and down the field on. There's almost nothing negative to say about the defense side of the ball coming out of the spring game. And again, limited ability to watch. I watched as much as I could, but between watching my son and all that, like I caught bits and pieces, and everything was fantastic. I consumed a lot of like the post-game reaction stuff. I consumed a lot of different just reading on what people were saying about the game afterwards. And it confirmed a lot of what what I picked up on, even though I was also chasing a almost 2-year-old around the stadium at certain points in the scrimmage. So defense was fantastic though. And it's hard because I would imagine that it's going to make the offense better, that group is going to be so good. But there are certain moments where you get a little bit worried, or certain things that happen that make you a little bit worried. For example, the offensive line, which I think continues to be an issue. And I know there was a number of folks, I think Brian Day might have said it, or at least maybe Chip Kelly said it after the game, that they mentioned, it's hard to judge the O-line today specifically because the defensive line is so good, like I was alluding to. And isn't that the problem, though? Is that the defensive line is so good and the offensive line is struggling? That's what, that doesn't make me feel better just because it's the spring game and we're going to sit here and say it's hard to judge them because our defensive line is so good. Of course the defensive line is good, but that group, the offensive line group, needs to be better because in the playoffs, they're going to face similar defensive lines as to what they face every day of practice. So yes, by design, I would imagine the defensive line being so good, the defense being so good, that's going to make the offense better. That's going to make the offensive line get better as practices go on and leading up to the season, and hopefully throughout the season as well. As your opponents get a little bit more tough along the way, you got Oregon somewhat early, but you got Penn State, you'll get Michigan. So yes, those are going to be that's going to impact the ability for that group to develop and get better. But I maintain the same worries I had about that group that I had going into the spring game, which is just that, yeah, okay, they say they're looking for the best 5. I'm still wondering what that looks like myself. And there are some serious, I don't want to make it seem like it's this massive. I'm not saying they don't have anybody on the offensive line that's worth a damn. That's definitely not the point that I'm trying to make here. But I think that as you look across the board, it's clearly a weakness. There was a number of times where the quarterbacks were under duress, sort of running for their lives, trying to make a play, but they couldn't because the pocket broke down so quickly. Right tackle in particular seems to be one that needs to draw some focus. And I know after the game, you had Ryan Day talking about specifically this idea of Josh Fryer playing right tackle if needed. Like he's almost like a backup option. And he mentioned he's used to playing that spot. He's obviously played some guard as well. And that was where he kind of gave the line of, we're looking for the best 5. I don't know if the best 5 are on this team. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if they hit the portal and try to find somebody. I mean, and that's been the question all along. Every step of the way. Quinshon Judkins transfers in. Great. Will Howard transfers in. Awesome. They steal a couple recruits from Alabama when Nick Saban retires. Cool. Aaron Nolan. Great. There's all these players coming in, and we feel Caleb Downs comes. We feel really good about it. But the one thing we kept going back to was like, no matter how many players they get at other positions, is this offensive line going to be good enough to hold their own against the best teams in college football when you get to that time of year where it's the college football playoff? I still have questions about it. I do. And I do think, to Ryan Day's point, Josh Fryer is probably the best on the offensive line. Offensive line is one of the areas I wanted to watch more of, and admittedly didn't get a chance to really watch as detailed as I wanted to. I didn't see any low snaps from Seth McLaughlin, so that's good news. Donovan Jackson, I feel like I trust pretty much, but I think it's the tackle spots that I kind of go in with the most caution. And I know Josh Fryer's probably the best of the group, and so they're going to bounce him around or put him where he needs to go. But I still think that if there's a chance to add in the portal there, I think Ryan Day and this team need to absolutely jump at it, because it's still the one concern I have. Again, tell me all you want about how great the defense is and how that's going to cause some issues for the offensive line. I buy it, but you're wanting an offensive line that can withstand those types of defenses, or defenses that are similar, defensive lines that are similar, because that's been the problem the last couple of years, right? Like every loss to Michigan the last 3 years, all in a row. The one thing we kept going back to was Michigan was tough from the trenches. They were built to win Big Ten football. That hard nose, hit him in the mouth in the trenches, and Ohio State was not. They were a finesse team. Are they ready to do a little bit of both? Is the big thing I'm still wondering. And I know it probably sounds on some level like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth when I say, well, the defense is so good give the offense a break here or there, like I did in talking about Will Howard's play. And at times he looked a little hesitant and the secondary was locking guys up. Like, yeah, they need to be ready for those types of defenses as well. But the difference is I'm just not as worried about the rest of the offense. Like, if you look across the board at the talent, Emeka Egbuka, Jeremiah Smith, Travion Henderson, Will Howard's played at a high level in college. I know those guys can perform there. This offensive line, we still had questions about last season, and we still have questions about it now. Like, I just think it's one of those things for that group specifically that we're not going to truly have a definitive like trust in them until we see them do it in games that matter, or until they land some potential transfer in the transfer portal here in the coming weeks. Like, those are the only two things that I can think of that'll make us have a little bit more confidence in it. But right now, still the biggest weakness on this team. From what I caught, there were still some issues. I know that even our good friend Radu, who follows and listens to the show every single week, he was tweeting me about how right tackle is still an issue, and I think there's a lot of people who shared those sentiments. So should the Buckeyes sort of stick this thing out and just hope on development against a really good defensive line throughout the rest of spring and into the summer and ahead of the season, will help them get better? Or do you want to see them hit the transfer portal and try to bolster that offensive line group that still seems to be the biggest concern for this team going into 2024? You can hit us up at Spencito_ is my handle. You can also jump in the YouTube comments, the 922 The Fan YouTube page. Final segment when we get back. This segment reserved for some miscellaneous notes, some other things that I caught when I was down in Columbus on Saturday as we react to the spring game. I am going to talk about the tight end position because I hit on that on last week's episode, and we saw some reps being rotated there. Who do we think is going to be the lead? Who's the leader of the clubhouse on that group? We'll get to all that when we get back. Keep it locked. It is Sons of the Shoe, but here is a quick word from our sponsors.